They were just two teens boarding a plane, first-class tickets in hand, smiles on their faces, excited to visit their grandmother. But then, the flight attendant paused, looked them up and down. "Are you sure you're in the right seats?" And just like that, everything changed. Ava and Elijah Brooks Black, brilliant, and barely 17, were asked to move. Not because they were loud, not because they were late, but because someone decided they didn't belong. What the crew didn't know, their father, Darius Brooks, was the CEO of the airline. But this isn't just a story about power. It's about a father forced to choose between protocol and justice. A daughter asked to surrender her dignity at 35,000 feet. A son learning how quiet pain can be loud. So what really happened on that flight? Who stood up? Who stayed silent? And how did two teenagers change the future of an entire industry? The answers will challenge you. The journey will move you. The truth, it might just ground you too. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, take your seat, fasten your belt, and let's begin this flight together. The boarding area of Gate 67 at San Francisco International Airport buzzed with quiet efficiency. Screens glowed. Suitcases clicked across tile floors. Travelers queued with varying degrees of urgency. But in the center of it all, two teenagers stood remarkably calm, unbothered by the rush that surrounded them. Ava Brooks adjusted the strap of her charcoal sketchbook as she approached the priority boarding line. Her brother, Elijah, tapped his digital boarding pass to the scanner with practiced ease. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. As fraternal twins, their rhythm was effortless, wordless, and nearly psychic. Solace Air. Flight 709 to London. Heathrow was one of the airline's premier international routes. Aboard the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, first class promised lie-flat pods, ambient lighting, personalized dining menus, and quiet. That was what they were after quiet. Ava needed the stillness to draw, and Elijah had hours of university prep materials queued up on his tablet. As they entered the plane, a male flight attendant welcomed them with a warm smile. "Seats 3A and 3B right this way. Enjoy your flight." Ava nodded politely and stepped down the aisle, her dreadlocks swaying gently at her shoulders, tied back in a cobalt silk scarf. Her hoodie was oversized, soft, and subtly embroidered with her initials. Elijah, just a bit taller, wore a navy crew neck and pressed joggers. Their clothes were relaxed but pristine, their presence composed. The kind of composed that sometimes made people look twice. And they were used to it. They settled into their pods. Ava took the window seat. She always preferred the view. Elijah took the aisle. As the aircraft filled with passengers, Ava leaned her head against the window and pulled out her sketchbook. The graphite pencil danced between her fingers, sketching a distant horizon line, clouds, angles of light, the slope of the airplane wing as seen through the glass. Elijah, meanwhile, adjusted his noise-canceling headphones, then reached for his tablet. He pulled up a documentary on climate justice and pressed play, but let it buffer. He wasn't quite ready to listen yet. Instead, he glanced over at Ava and offered her a slight smile. She returned it with one of her own, the kind that said, "We made it through another airport without a hassle." That small relief meant something. Their father, Darius Brooks, had always told them, "You'll never control how you're seen, but you can always control how you carry yourself." It had taken years to truly understand what he meant by that. The first-class cabin continued to fill. A man in a sleek designer suit took the seat across the aisle. A flight attendant offered him a glass of champagne. Ava and Elijah were given sparkling apple cider in tall flutes. Elijah nodded in thanks. Ava tapped the rim of her glass with her pencil, letting the ring echo softly as she shaded the slope of the cabin wall. Somewhere behind them, a child began to cry. Flight crews called out final boarding zones. Everything, at least for now, was quiet, until it wasn't. A sudden burst of agitated voice broke the cabin's rhythm. It wasn't loud, just sharp enough to cut through the low, ambient hum. "Oh, no, no. This has to be a mistake." The voice belonged to a woman who looked to be in her late 50s, impeccably dressed, blonde hair, set just so, diamond earrings, wide-brimmed sunglasses perched atop her head, even though they were inside a plane. Beside her stood a man with the flushed complexion of someone who had grown used to getting his way. The couple stopped directly beside Ava and Elijah's seats. "These are ours," the woman declared, turning to the flight attendant. "Seats 3A and 3B. We booked these specifically." The attendant, Michelle Caraway, a woman with 20 years of experience and a perfectly practiced smile, checked her handheld manifest. She glanced from the Whitmores to the twins, then back again. "Let me just check something," Michelle said, brows slightly furrowed. Ava looked up from her drawing. Her pencil stilled. Elijah sat straighter. "Is there a problem?" he asked evenly. "No irritation, just clarity?" "Just give us a moment," Michelle said, flashing him a smile too quick to be genuine. The blonde woman folded her arms. "We selected these seats weeks ago." "This is ridiculous." Elijah reached calmly into his backpack and retrieved their boarding passes. "These are our assigned seats," he said, handing them to Michelle. "Booked months ago." Michelle glanced at the passes. They were clearly printed with 3A and 3B. She murmured, frowning. "Just a moment." As Michelle stepped away, the woman turned toward Ava and Elijah. Her smile was tight. "Sometimes people get bumped up by accident," she said. "It happens." Ava blinked. We didn't get bumped," she said softly. The woman didn't reply. She simply turned her back and began whispering to her husband. Elijah's jaw tightened, just barely. He tapped his knee once, then stilled it. Ava, meanwhile, flipped her sketchbook closed, the page only half shaded. She could feel it again, that strange tension that hung in the air when people questioned their right to exist in spaces they had every right to be in. It was never loud. It didn't need to be. It showed up in tone, in glances, in the way someone emphasized a word like accident. Michelle returned a minute later, tapping her screen. "I'll need to double-check with the manifest team," she said. "Why?" Elijah asked. Michelle paused. Her voice dropped to that saccharine softness reserved for speaking to children. "Sometimes these things happen, and it's best if we just sort it out quietly." "Okay." Elijah met her eyes. "We're seated exactly where we're supposed to be." Michelle offered another tight smile and moved forward. Ava leaned in and whispered, "This feels off." "I know," Elijah said, "but don't say anything. Not yet." They sat in silence. The clouds outside had shifted. The mood inside had too, and the flight hadn't even taken off. But the story had already begun. Barbara Whitmore didn't sit quietly. That much was obvious. While the other first-class passengers adjusted their headrests or scrolled through their devices, she stood stiffly in the aisle like a museum curator who just discovered graffiti on a Rembrandt. Her mouth pressed into a thin line, and her heavily bejeweled wrist waved in short, agitated flicks toward the seats Ava and Elijah occupied. "I'm not trying to be difficult," she said to Michelle Caraway. who had just returned with her tablet. "But I booked these specific seats for a reason. I always take 3A and 3B when we fly Solace. Always." Craig Whitmore stood behind her like a brooding monolith, arms folded, face pink with the effort of holding in his irritation. He hadn't said a word since boarding, but the flush in his cheeks and the sharpness in his breath said plenty. Michelle nodded. "I understand. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm doing everything I can." Ava didn't look at her brother. She didn't need to. She could feel the heat in Elijah's silence. The cabin was quiet, but tense. A few rows up, a businessman with earbuds in paused his scrolling, subtly pulling one bud out to listen. A couple across the aisle exchanged glances, but no one said anything. Elijah leaned forward slightly, voice low but steady. "Ma'am," he said to Michelle, "we've already shown you our boarding passes. We are seated where we were assigned, where we paid to be." Barbara's mouth twitched at the word paid. "Oh, please," she muttered, then louder. "Everyone knows people get these seats with points these days or through employee perks. It doesn't mean—" "Excuse me." Ava's voice was quiet, almost soft, but it stopped Barbara cold. For a second, even Michelle blinked. "We paid for these seats," Ava continued, "with actual money. Not points, not perks, not anything free." Michelle held up her hands, palms out. "Let's not escalate," she said, her voice shifting into that patronizing tone of false calm. "There's likely been a simple mix-up. We do sometimes overbook first class, and in those cases we have to make accommodations." Elijah's jaw clenched. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Michelle hesitated. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to move to another section of the plane. We do have 2 perfectly good seats in premium economy. Extra leg room. Quiet zone." Barbara exhaled in exaggerated relief. "See? There's a solution. Everyone wins." Ava blinked, except the people who are being asked to give up their rightful seats for no reason. Michelle's smile thinned. "You're not being asked to give them up for no reason. It's a seating issue." Elijah shook his head. "No, it's a perception issue. You're assuming that we're the anomaly here." Michelle's professional mask slipped for a heartbeat, but she caught it before it shattered. "I'm sorry," she said tightly, "but if you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to escalate this further." "Escalate how?" Elijah asked. "By notifying the captain and potentially involving ground security." A hush fell over the cabin. Ava's hand moved instinctively to her sketchbook. She didn't open it. She just held it close, like it could shield her from the weight of so many eyes. She wasn't afraid, but she was something else. Tired. This wasn't new. Not really. Not the raised eyebrows at check-in. Not the double glances in lounges. Not the disbelief that someone like her could belong in a space like this. And it wasn't always blatant. Usually it was a look, a tone, a smile that said, "Oh, are you sure you're in the right place?" What made it worse was that Michelle wasn't shouting. She wasn't even rude. That made it harder to fight, harder to name. But Ava knew what was happening. She knew it in her gut. Michelle turned back to Barbara and Craig. "If you'll just give me a moment, I'll have their new seat numbers printed." Elisha stood. His movement was deliberate, quiet, but filled the space between them like thunder. Ava rose with him. "Fine," he said, teeth gritted, "but this isn't over." Barbara huffed. "Oh, please. You're making it a whole thing." Michelle gestured to another flight attendant, young, nervous-looking, who arrived with a faint smile and escorted Ava and Elijah toward the back. "Thank you for your cooperation," Michelle said as they passed. Her tone sugar-coated. Craig stepped aside to let them through. his face neutral. Ava caught a flicker in his expression. Was it guilt or simply discomfort at being involved? They moved down the aisle, and as they did, Ava felt it, the eyes, watching, judging, some sympathetic, some blank. No one spoke, but their silence roared louder than any accusation. She felt it in her bones. Elijah walked one step ahead, his back straight, but Ava could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept his fists loose, but clenched them just after they passed through each cabin section. First class faded behind them, business class passed next, then premium economy, and finally, row 41. Near the rear lavatories, beside the galley, they were shown to two middle seats cramped, narrow, hemmed in by a large man in a windbreaker and a woman holding a fussing toddler. Ava sat. Her knees nearly touched the seat in front of her. Her window was gone, her view replaced by someone's flailing elbow. She reached for her sketchbook but didn't open it. She didn't want to draw anymore. Elijah dropped into his seat beside her, silent. The flight attendant who had escorted them gave a weak smile. "Sorry again. Hope the rest of your flight goes smoothly." Then he disappeared. Ava pulled her hoodie up and turned her face toward her brother. "Elijah," she whispered, "why didn't we say more?" He didn't answer at first, just stared straight ahead. Then finally, quietly, because if we had, we'd be labeled as angry, or difficult, or a threat. Ava nodded. She felt tears prick behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "I hate that we had to choose between our dignity and staying on the plane," she said. Elijah glanced at her. His voice was low, nearly inaudible over the growing hum of boarding. "We're not powerless." He pulled out his phone, glancing down the aisle. No one was watching. Everyone had returned to their distractions, their screens, their lives. He opened his contacts. There it was, Monica Tran, assistant to Darius Brooks. Their father didn't allow personal contact during flights or meetings. He was strict, professional, reserved. But this was different. This wasn't just personal. It was principle. Elijah's thumbs hovered over the screen. His pulse pounded, not from fear but from resolve. He typed, "Monica, this is Elijah Brooks. Ava and I were just removed from our assigned seats in first class on Flight 709. Names involve Barbara and Craig Whitmore. Lead flight attendant Michelle Caraway. Claimed overbooking. Implied we didn't belong. No system error. No verification. Please alert our father." He reread it. Then hit send. The message was delivered instantly. And just like that, the quiet shifted. Not just inside the plane, but inside Elijah. Something had begun, and it wasn't going to end in row 41. The engine hum turned into a background whisper as boarding neared completion. Flight 709, bound for San Francisco, was scheduled to depart in 11 minutes. Passengers in rows ahead were settling in, pulling out headphones and folding blankets, while the world behind row 41, the rear of the plane, felt smaller than it should. Ava Brooks leaned her head against the cool wall, eyes closed, sketchbook unopened in her lap. She wasn't asleep. She was remembering, not just this flight, but every time someone had questioned her place, every microcut that hadn't bled but still scarred. The sales clerk who followed her in a boutique, the teacher who asked if she'd written her own essay, the man at the museum who assumed she and Elijah were part of a school group, not paying visitors. It was always gentle, polite, and it always told her the same thing. You do not belong. Elijah sat rigidly beside her, his gaze locked forward. He hadn't said a word since sending the text to Monica Tran 10 minutes ago. Ava finally stirred. Think she saw it? Elijah nodded. She always does. The phone hadn't buzzed, not yet, but they both knew something would happen. Because Monica wasn't just an assistant. She was the air traffic controller of their father's life screening, scheduling, solving, and their father, Darius Brooks, didn't tolerate incompetence, especially not when it came to his children. But he also wasn't reckless. He never raised his voice in boardrooms, never made threats in public. His power was in his presence, and if he was on his way to them now, then Flight 709 wasn't taking off anytime soon. A soft chime sounded above them, followed by Michelle Carraway's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your lead flight attendant, Michelle. We'll be closing the cabin doors shortly. Please ensure all carry-ons are properly stowed and that you're seated with your seatbelt fastened." Ava opened her eyes, watching a young mother across the aisle juggling a crying baby in an overstuffed diaper bag. The woman looked exhausted. Behind them, a man in a business suit was trying to make a last-minute phone call before signal loss. The world was still moving forward, like nothing had happened, like their removal from first class was a minor hiccup, a polite reshuffling, not the deep violation it truly was. Elijah shifted, pulling his phone from his pocket again. Still no response. Then a buzz, a single notification. His hand tightened. "It's Monica." Ava straightened. He opened the message. "Received. He's already on it. Stay seated. Do not speak further to staff. Doors will not close until cleared." Elijah read it twice, his lips tightening. "What does she mean?" "Already on it," Ava asked, as if in reply. A second buzz followed almost instantly. "Security is approaching the jet bridge. Your dad just stepped out of the car." Ava blinked. How we haven't even been gone 20 minutes. Elijah gave a half smile. He was nearby. And then, from the front of the plane, the air shifted. Michelle's voice returned. But not through the speaker this time. It was real, audible, uneasy. "Captain Merritt, there's been a change. I just got word from Gate Ops that someone is requesting to board." The reply from the cockpit was muffled but firm. "Boarding's closed." "No, sir. They're overriding that. The gate just reopened." A silence followed. Then footsteps, heavy, purposeful. A moment later, a man in a tailored gray coat entered the cabin. He was tall, composed, early 50s, salt and pepper at the temples, eyes sharp but not cold. And the moment Michelle saw him, her breath caught. Mr. Brooks. The name traveled ahead of him like wind before a storm. Several passengers straightened in their seats. A couple of heads turned. Others froze completely. Darius Brooks didn't need to introduce himself. His face was in Forbes, Bloomberg, TED Talks. He was the man who'd taken a regional carrier and turned it into Solace Airlines, the carrier of conscience, the face of innovation. He didn't speak as he walked. He didn't need to. He walked past first class, past business, past premium, all the way to the back, to row 41, and stopped. Ava, Elijah. They stood. He looked at them not just with concern, but with recognition. The kind that told them I saw what happened. I heard the silence between the words. I know. Ava felt her throat tighten, but she swallowed it down. "We're okay, Dad," Elijah added. "We didn't want to bother you. We just didn't want this to disappear." Darius nodded. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle but firm. "You did the right thing." Behind them, passengers whispered. And then Darius turned to face forward, eyes narrowing. Michelle had followed him part way back, but now froze several rows away. Her lips parted slightly, as if unsure whether to defend herself or vanish. "Michelle, Darius said calmly. "Could you please step aside? I'd like to speak to the captain." Her mouth opened, then closed. "Of course, sir." As she moved, Ava noticed the stiffness in her shoulders. She'd realized. Too late. Darius walked up the aisle slowly, his footsteps echoing louder than the engines. He disappeared into the cockpit. A full minute passed. Then 2. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a brief operational delay. Please remain seated and we'll update you shortly." Elijah chuckled under his breath. "He's grounding the flight, isn't he?" Ava nodded, smiling for the first time since they'd boarded. But the smile faded quickly, because the issue wasn't over. It never really was. Not just with one confrontation, one fired employee, one grounded plane. "What do you think he'll do?" she asked quietly. Elijah turned to her. "He won't yell. He won't threaten. But the people responsible are about to understand something very clearly. What that we don't rise above because we want to be noble. We rise because if we fall into rage, they'll call us dangerous." Ava nodded slowly, and for a moment, even in cramped row 41 beside the bathroom, surrounded by people who had looked through them, she felt powerful, not because of what their father might do, but because they had spoken and had been heard. Finally, from the front of the plane, Michelle walked stiffly down the aisle, carrying her small bag. Her face was pale. 2 other flight attendants followed silently. They were being removed. Passengers began whispering again. Some applauded quietly, but Ava didn't cheer. She only watched, because she knew the real story didn't end in applause. It started there, at the moment when someone decided to speak and someone else chose to listen. The air felt stiller now, but not settled. The scent of pressurized cabin air, synthetic leather, and burnt coffee lingered around row 41. Ava tucked her legs beneath her sketchbook now open, pencil hovering over the page without touching it. She wasn't drawing yet. She was remembering. The quiet march of her father up the aisle, the whisper of Michelle's shoes as she left, the tension that had stretched from the front of the plane to the tail, like a taut string threatening to snap. Elijah was next to her, scrolling quietly through his phone. News hadn't broken yet, not that they could tell from the onboard Wi-Fi, but Ava could sense it building. Whatever their father had said to the pilot, it had changed the shape of the flight. And once the outside world caught wind of it, there would be no way to keep it contained. From across the aisle, the young mother with the baby glanced over again. This time, her eyes held something different. Not pity, not confusion, not even curiosity. It was acknowledgement. Ava gave her a small nod. The woman smiled faintly in return. Elijah spoke without looking up. "Monica just texted again." Ava leaned closer. "She said we'll be staying in these seats for now. No more movement." Ava arched a brow. "That's fine. I'm not going back to first class just because it's ours." Elijah met her gaze. "We don't need the seat to prove we belong." "No," Ava said softly. "But I don't want this seat to become a symbol of surrender either." Elijah felt quiet. Then he said, "Maybe we make it a symbol of something else." She turned to him, like what he lifted his phone, turned it toward her. A blank notes app. "Help me write it," he said. Ava blinked. "Write what?" "The story. Not just about this flight. About all of it. The stuff we're always told to ignore." Ava stared at the screen, then at her sketchbook. "I was just about to draw something," she whispered. "A seat. A pair of hands gripping the armrests. A window view with clouds, but the reflection in the glass shows 2 kids. Elijah smiled. Perfect. You're drawing. My words. A soft chime sounded. The captain came on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're still experiencing a brief delay due to some internal reviews. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The words were smooth, practiced, neutral, but everyone on board knew something extraordinary was happening. First class was nearly silent now. Barbara and Craig Whitmore, who had returned to their seats earlier with forced smiles, sat stiffly, eyes darting every time someone walked past. Their entitlement, so loudly broadcast earlier, had turned to something hollow and unconvincing. Across the aisle, a middle-aged black man in a navy tracksuit quietly tapped the side of his phone. He gave Ava and Elijah a slow nod, nothing performative, just presence, just respect. Ava's voice dropped to a whisper. You think he knows Elijah didn't need to ask who she meant? He nodded. He saw everything. Behind them. In row 43, a teenage girl leaned forward. She looked about their age. Her skin was a warm brown, curls piled high, and she wore an oversized UCLA hoodie. Her voice was soft but sure. You guys handled that with serious grace. Ava turned, surprised. The girl smiled. I saw it all. The way that woman talked to you, I wanted to scream. But you didn't give her the reaction she wanted. Elijah offered a quiet thanks. I'm Nadia, the girl added. Ava. Elijah. Nadia leaned in slightly. I think this plane's about to become famous. Elijah nodded. It already is. They all chuckled under their breath. But then silence again, because beneath the small talk, there was an ache still settling. Ava finally placed pencil to page. Her hand moved, gently sketching the slope of a plane window. The outlines of 2 heads, silhouetted in reflection, one with curls, one with glasses. Elijah turned back to the phone and began typing, Row 41. Doesn't mean you're beneath anyone. It means you're watching the world from the back, so you never forget what it looks like when justice walks down the aisle. Meanwhile, in the front cabin, passengers watched as 2 uniformed staff members clearly from airline operations entered with tablets and earpieces. They stopped beside Barbara and Craig's seats. The murmured exchange was brief. Barbara's voice hissed audibly. This is unacceptable. Do you know who we are? A few heads turned. Elijah heard it too. He shook his head slowly, still clinging to that line. He muttered. Craig was pale now, sweat forming at his brow. The staff did not argue. They simply stood, poised, waiting. And then, with a forced sigh, Barbara grabbed her purse and stood. The entire plane fell silent. Every eye was on them. They began walking down the aisle, toward the back. Ava watched them as they passed. Barbara wouldn't look her in the eye. Craig glanced once, hesitated, then looked away. As they exited, a soft ripple of conversation began in the cabin. Not loud, just people acknowledging something significant had occurred, something that couldn't be ignored or spun. The seatbelt sign was still on, but Ava felt a different sort of permission to feel, to reflect, to claim what had been taken. The silence was broken by a notification buzz. Elijah checked his phone. Monica again. The captain will make a final announcement in 5 minutes. Your father is off the aircraft. Michelle has been suspended pending investigation. The Whitmores have been officially banned from all Solace Air flights. Elijah showed Ava. She exhaled slowly. Is that justice? She asked. Elijah tilted his head. It's accountability. Ava went back to her sketch. She added a small detail an open sketchbook in one of the reflections. Words spilling off the page in her twin brother's handwriting. Then another buzz. This time, it was her phone. A message from their dad. "You good?" She smiled faintly and typed back, "Yeah, just getting started." The captain returned to the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your patience. We've received clearance to proceed. Flight time today will be approximately 10 hours and 50 minutes. The aircraft jolted gently as the engines fired again. The slow roll back from the gate began. Ava looked out the window, sunlight catching the wing just right. Behind her, Nadia leaned forward again. "Hey," she said, "when you finish that drawing, can I share it?" Ava smiled. "Only if you let Elijah share the caption. Deal." The cabin tilted slightly as the plane turned toward the runway. Elijah closed his eyes. Not to sleep, to remember every moment. Because one day, this story wouldn't just belong to them. It would belong to everyone who'd ever been told to move, to shift, to shrink, to disappear. And they would finally have the words and the art to push back. Together, the plane was airborne now, a slow and steady ascent above Los Angeles. Outside the window, sunlight played across the clouds in long, lazy streaks. Ava pressed her forehead to the glass, watching the city disappear below them. Her sketchbook sat closed on her lap, graphite dust smudging the edges. Something about the altitude made everything quieter. Not just the engines, her thoughts, too. Elijah was scrolling through news apps on his phone. Even though the plane's Wi-Fi made every page take forever to load, finally, he sighed and gave up, sliding the phone into the seat pocket. Still nothing. He muttered, "It's like the world hasn't caught up to what just happened." "Give it time," Ava murmured. "It always does." He studied her for a moment. There was something in her voice, not bitterness exactly, but something deeper, like she was bracing for a wave that hadn't come yet, but would. "I was thinking about the look on her face," Ava said suddenly. "Michelle, when she made us get up, she didn't think she was doing anything wrong. That's what scares me." Elijah nodded slowly. She thought she was protecting the space, as if we were the threat. Silence. Ava traced a line along her armrest with her fingertip. "I used to love planes," she said softly. "Not just flying, being inside them. The safety briefings, the hum of takeoff, the little tray tables. I used to think, up here, everyone was equal. No streets, no corner stores, no neighborhoods. Just people, suspended in air together." She paused. "Now it feels like even the sky has divisions." Elijah didn't respond right away. He knew better than to fix her sadness with platitudes. Instead, he leaned his head back against the seat and let her words hang in the pressurized silence. A few rows behind them, the teenage girl Nadia was scribbling in a notebook. Occasionally, she glanced up, her eyes flitting between the twins and the flight attendants now quietly making their rounds. A new one had taken Michelle's place, a younger man with a calm demeanor and patient eyes. He offered them water with a kind smile. Not the strained sort people wear when they're afraid of getting in trouble, but something gentler, something real. Ava thanked him and sipped slowly, letting the cool water settle the dryness in her throat. She wondered if the man knew what had happened, or if the quiet whispers among the staff were starting to piece together the truth. After a moment, she opened her sketchbook again. This time, she drew the aisle. Not just the seats or the passengers, but the subtle body language of it all. The lean of tension, the turn of judgment, the collapse of pride. And in the background, two silhouettes walking away, Barbara and Craig. Small now, shrinking into the tail end of the plane. The intercom clicked on again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're cruising at 38 feet. Current weather is clear, and we'll begin beverage service shortly. We thank you again for your patience earlier and hope you enjoy the remainder of your flight." A few people clapped lightly. Ava looked at Elijah. "Do you think they really think it's over?" He raised an eyebrow. People always think it's over when they're not the ones still carrying it. She returned to her sketch. It wasn't over. Not for her. Not for Elijah. Maybe not for anyone on this plane who looked like them, loved like them, or had ever felt the sting of not belonging. What happened today wasn't an isolated incident. It was a mirror, a magnifying glass, a moment when things could no longer stay under the surface. The turbulence came without warning. A sudden jolt rocked the cabin. Nothing dangerous, just sharp enough to make drinks tremble and conversations pause. Elijah reached for the armrest automatically. Ava caught herself mid-sketch, pencil slipping off the page. The seatbelt sign dinged back on. A pause, then a low murmur of chuckles, as if to say, "Well, that woke us up." The flight attendants moved quickly to secure carts. But there was no panic, just focus. Ava's heart had quickened, not from fear of the turbulence, but because, in that split second of motion, she'd felt unmoored. Her safety felt fragile, not from the air, but from something deeper. The knowledge that people like Michelle existed in every industry, in every uniform, wearing every smile. The turbulence passed just as fast. A few seconds, maybe less. But Ava didn't return to her drawing right away. Instead, she glanced at her brother. "I'm scared it'll happen again," she said quietly. "It might," Elijah answered honestly. "But next time, maybe no one will know we're the CEO's kids." Elijah nodded. "That's what scares me, too. Their father's power had shielded them. But what about the other kids? The ones who didn't have a direct line to a C-suite? The ones who couldn't text someone to stop a plane?" Ava leaned back, her eyes closed, but her thoughts were alive. What if this story did go public? What if the footage someone had taken found its way online? Would people call them entitled? Say they should have just sat down and flown in silence? Or would they see it for what it was, a test of how invisible black excellence could be to those who chose not to see? Her thoughts were interrupted by another passenger approaching quietly. "Nadia." She stood in the aisle, holding her notebook. "Sorry to bother you," she said, her voice gentle. "I just wanted to show you something." Ava sat up, curious. Nadia handed over the page. On it was a poem, just a short one. They asked you to move, not because you were wrong, but because their comfort was louder than your presence. And yet, here you are, still rising, still here, still art. Ava felt her throat tighten. Elijah read over her shoulder and whispered, "That's beautiful." Nadia offered a sheepish smile. "Your drawing inspired it." Ava clutched the page. "Thank you. I hope you don't mind," Nadia added. "I think others need to read it too." "Please do," Ava said. "Just maybe sign it." They shared a quiet laugh. When Nadia returned to her seat, Ava looked at her brother. "We're not the only ones telling this story." Elijah nodded. "And that's exactly what makes it powerful." The plane continued its journey across the sky. But down in row 41, something more powerful than jet fuel was keeping them aloft. Truth, voice, and the unwavering will to keep rising, no matter who tried to push them down. Darius Brooks sat in the window seat of a sleek black SUV, staring out at the vast airport runway. His hands rested calmly on his knees, but his mind was racing. His executive assistant, Shayna Lynn, sat across from him in the rear-facing jump seat, her iPad open and notifications quietly pinging every few seconds. "The cabin crew has been informed, sir," Shayna said. "They're aware you've requested discretion until further notice." Darius nodded. "And Michelle Carraway. Suspended pending internal review. Legal is already drafting an interim statement. Not public," he said. "Voice even." Shayna looked up. "Sir, not yet. We don't leak moments. We lead with change." She gave a small, respectful nod. "Understood." Through the tinted window, Darius watched the Solace Air jet taxi toward Gate 19, the very flight his children were on. From the outside, it was an ordinary flight. Families, briefcases, plastic luggage tags dangling from roller bags. But inside, he knew, a shift had already begun. Something that couldn't be unspun with a press release or donation. A father should never have to interfere with his children's flight. And yet here he was, not with outrage, but with responsibility. He inhaled slowly, held it, and then exhaled through his nose. The kind of breath a man takes before stepping into a room he didn't build, but now must rebuild. On board, Ava and Elijah sat in silence, the poem from Nadia folded between them. The moment had softened something in the air. People weren't gawking anymore. Whispers had faded. Even the turbulence had passed. Still, a hum of tension remained. The kind of silence that settles when everyone knows something real happened, but no one wants to say the wrong thing. Elijah leaned toward his sister. "You okay?" Ava nodded. "Yeah, just thinking about Mom." He looked at her gently. "She always said, 'You don't have to shout to shake a room.'" Ava smiled faintly. "She'd probably laugh if she knew we shook a plane." Elijah smiled too, but it faded quickly. "You think Dad's going to keep this quiet?" Ava considered. "He doesn't do silence when it matters." Moments later, the new flight attendant returned with warm towels and a subtle, quiet kindness that didn't need to be announced. He placed one on each of their trays, then paused. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for what happened earlier. We can do better." Elijah looked him in the eye. "Thanks. That was all. A small gesture, but it mattered." In row 43, Nadia was now typing on her phone. Her poem had already been shared to her modest social feed, and she'd gotten a dozen private messages, some from strangers in the cabin asking if they could repost it. She was stunned. She hadn't written it for fame. She'd written it for truth. She stared at the last line again. Still art. It echoed in her like a drumbeat. Meanwhile, in the front galley, Barbara and Craig Whitmore were fuming. "I want to speak to the pilot," Barbara hissed. "You've already been asked to remain in your seat." "Ma'am," a senior male attendant replied with the calm of someone who had been yelled at 100 times before. "This is customer abuse," Craig barked. "You've humiliated us in front of this entire plane." The attendant didn't respond. His training told him that silence was safer than escalation, but even silence can grow teeth. Barbara's voice pitched louder. "That man, those kids, whatever strings they pulled, it's not going to end well for your airline. You think people like us don't know lawyers." The flight attendant blinked once. "Ma'am, we're in the air. Please return to your seat." She sat back with a huff, but not in defeat, in delay. Craig leaned toward her. "They won't get away with this," she whispered back. "They won't. Not if I have anything to say. At the same time, In the cockpit, the pilot's comms device buzzed. The message was short. Executive arrival requested. CEO Brooks will be meeting Flight 227 on arrival tarmac. No delay. The pilot blinked twice at the name. He'd heard stories. Of course, everyone at Solace Air knew who Darius Brooks was. Visionary, respected, calm, but unshakable. The pilot turned to his co-pilot and tapped the screen once. Well, this just got interesting. Back in row 5, Ava closed her sketchbook for the final time. I think I'm done drawing for today. Elijah looked over. Why? Because this story isn't about what I can sketch anymore. It's what happens after. She slid the sketchbook into her backpack and folded her hands on her lap. I don't want to record it. I want to live it. Elijah nodded. Then, a small ding. Ava's phone lit up. Dad landing in 28. I'll be there. She showed the screen to her brother. He leaned back in his seat. Guess we're not the only ones landing today. 28 minutes later, as the plane dipped through the last layer of cloud cover and the sun began to fade toward the edge of the horizon, the cabin filled with that familiar shift bag zipped, shoulders rolled, seats returned to upright. The voice of the pilot came overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. On behalf of Solace Air, we thank you for flying with us and wish you a meaningful evening. Not a safe evening, not a pleasant evening, a meaningful one. That single word left a trail of chills down Elijah's spine. The plane taxied slowly, but instead of approaching the usual gate, it pulled off to a private tarmac used for executive arrivals. Most passengers didn't notice at first, but those who did exchanged quiet glances. Ava's hands tightened around the straps of her bag. Then the seatbelt sign dinged off. And in the front doorway, as it opened with a gentle hiss, Darius Brooks stepped into view. Not in a suit, not in sunglasses, not flanked by an entourage. Just a black man, a father, calm, focused, grounded like the earth. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to, because when Ava and Elijah stood from their seats and walked toward him, the entire plane felt it. Not power, presence, not revenge, restoration. Darius placed a hand on each of their shoulders, a silent embrace that spoke across generations. Behind them, some passengers clapped softly. Others bowed their heads, realizing the moment was bigger than a delay. It was a reckoning, one built not on noise, but on truth. And this was only the beginning. The sun had nearly disappeared by the time passengers began to disembark from Flight 227. The golden light of early evening stretched across the tarmac, casting long, quiet shadows that made the moment feel heavier than it looked. Ava and Elijah walked between their father, their steps slow, uncertain not out of fear, but reverence. It wasn't every day that the CEO of a major airline came to meet two teenage passengers on the runway. But it also wasn't every day a father had to confront a system built in his name that had failed his own children. Behind them, passengers peered out from the plane windows, some recording discreetly with phones, others simply staring in silence. Darius didn't look back at them. His eyes were only for Ava and Elijah. They reached the black SUV idling on the private strip. Darius opened the rear door and gestured for his children to enter. He followed, and the door closed with a soft, definitive click. Privacy sealed them in. Inside, no one spoke for a long while. The hum of the engine, the low thread of jazz from the speakers, and the faint clack of tires over tarmac filled the silence. Finally, Ava spoke, her voice softer than usual. You didn't have to come? Darius turned to her slowly. I did. Alicia looked down at his hands. You think it's going to fix anything? Darius didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward, clasped his hands together, and took a breath that felt like it traveled from someplace deeper than his lungs. Fixing is easy, he said, but healing, that's the real work. Ava and Elijah looked at him, unsure whether they were about to be lectured or embraced. Darius continued, "What happened to you today? It wasn't a mistake. It was a symptom." Elijah frowned. "You mean racism?" "No," Darius said. "I mean something deeper. The quiet agreement people make with power. The way they let themselves believe someone doesn't belong somewhere, and then act like it's just policy." Ava leaned back. It didn't feel quiet. It felt loud. Darius's jaw tightened slightly. "That's because you were forced to hear what they've been whispering behind closed doors for decades." Elijah looked out the window. "So what now? We fire them. Make a statement." "No," Darius said. "We make change." They fell into silence again, this time not out of tension, but alignment. There was a weight to Darius's words, a clarity that had not yet settled into plan, but was already setting into purpose. The SUV glided down a private entrance and pulled into a restricted terminal lounge, sleek marble floors, frosted glass, and a quietness reserved for the kind of people who made decisions, not requests. Inside, Shayna was already waiting, files in hand, tablet glowing. "Michelle Carraway has retained counsel," she said as they walked in. "She's claiming wrongful termination due to protocol confusion." Ava scoffed. "She confused us for a threat." Shayna glanced at her, then looked to Darius. "I've also received calls from 5 journalists. Someone on board leaked the story already." Darius nodded calmly. "Tell them the truth, but don't let them own the narrative. We speak when we're ready." Shayna nodded. "We also have Barbara and Craig Whitmore demanding a formal apology." Elijah let out a sharp breath of disbelief. "They want an apology. They were the ones shouting like we crashed their wedding." Darius remained still, then slowly turned toward a large display monitor embedded in the lounge wall. "Pull up the footage," he said. Shayna tapped a few buttons. The lounge lights dimmed, and security camera footage from the plane's cabin flickered onto the screen. It was grainy but clear enough. Barbara standing, jabbing her finger toward the twins. Michelle stepping in. Words exchanged. Passengers murmuring. Then the moment where Ava and Elijah are escorted out, shoulders stiff, eyes forward. Darius watched with no expression. He wasn't looking for outrage. He was looking for the truth behind the moment. And it was all there. The twins weren't disruptive. They weren't confrontational. They were simply there, existing. And for some people, that was the threat. Darius's voice broke the silence. "I built this airline with the belief that dignity doesn't need to be upgraded. It comes standard." He turned back to his children, and today, that belief was tested. Ava stepped forward. "Are you going to change the policy?" "No," he said. "I'm going to change the culture." Shayna raised an eyebrow. Sir Darius stood taller, his voice low but resonant. "We don't need better rules. We need better hearts in the rooms where those rules are made." Elijah's voice cracked slightly. "You think people will actually change?" Darius turned to him. "I think if they don't, we replace them." There was a long pause. Then Shayna spoke again, her voice more tentative now. "There's one more thing. Nadia Patel, the girl who wrote the poem On Board, it's gone viral. Millions of views. The hashtag #RushFirstClassKids is trending. She's requesting a conversation with you. Quietly." Ava smiled softly. "She was brave." Elisha nodded. "She spoke when the rest of the cabin stayed quiet. Darius looked thoughtful. Then she deserves to be heard. Shayna began organizing notes on her tablet, but Darius held up a hand. Not yet. She looked at him. I want to speak with the crew first. Shayna hesitated. Sir, some may feel threatened. They should feel seen, he replied. Not everyone who stood silent did it out of cruelty. Some did it out of fear. But if we want to build something better, we have to start by listening. His words hung in the room like an oath. Ava stepped closer. Can we be there when you do? Darius looked between his children. Yes, he said quietly, because this isn't just about passengers anymore. It's about legacy. As they sat down together on the long leather couch beneath the screen, Elijah turned to his father. Did you ever think, when you were starting out, that one day you'd be doing this? Darius leaned back, eyes distant. I thought I'd spend my life trying to build a ladder high enough to climb out of the noise. He looked at his children. But now I know the real work is in tearing down the walls that make the ladder necessary. And for the first time since the plane landed, they all felt it. Not just change, but home. Not a place, a principle. And it would start here, with them, together. In a quiet conference room adjacent to Solasair's private terminal, 6 uniformed crew members sat uneasily at a long oval table. The lighting was warm, but the air felt heavy with anticipation. Everyone had heard the rumors how the flight had been stopped mid-taxi, how the CEO himself had intervened, how the entire internet was now dissecting their every move. At the head of the table sat Michelle Carraway. Her arms were crossed, chin slightly lifted, eyes sharp with defensiveness. Beside her, the second flight attendant, Jamie Lewis, kept his head lowered, fiddling with the corner of a paper napkin. The pilot, Captain Neil Reyes, a veteran of 28 years in the cockpit, looked somewhere between embarrassed and exhausted. The others, 2 junior attendants and the cabin service lead, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The door opened. Darius Brooks entered with calm, measured steps. He didn't wear a suit this time, just a navy sweater, black slacks, and an expression unreadable to anyone who didn't know him well. Behind him came Shayna Lynn, tablet in hand, and at a small distance, Ava and Elijah. The crew straightened instinctively, though Darius didn't demand it. He took his time walking around the table and then chose to stand, not sit. I asked to speak with you today. He began, not as your CEO, not as your boss, but as a man, as a father, and as someone who believes deeply in the mission we claim to serve. Michelle's eyes narrowed. Jamie stole a glance toward the twins, visibly nervous. Darius turned toward the group slowly. Tell me something, he said, voice calm. What did you see when my children boarded that flight? There was a long silence. Then Captain Reyes cleared his throat. I saw 2 young people, first class, quiet. Anything unusual about them? No, sir. And yet, Darius said, turning toward Michelle. They were removed from their seats, and Michelle folded her arms tighter. Protocol required verification. There was a concern raised by a passenger. A concern, Darius echoed, about what Michelle hesitated. They didn't appear standard. Standard. Darius repeated quietly. He glanced toward Elijah and Ava, who stood silently at the back of the room. Define standard. Michelle stiffened. They didn't look like the usual first-class passengers. You mean they didn't look white? She didn't answer. Darius didn't need her to. Instead, he turned to Jamie. You were the one who spoke to my daughter? You said, and I quote, maybe you're confused about your seat. Is that right? Jamie's eyes dropped. Yeah, sir. But I didn't mean. Darius held up a hand. I'm not here to destroy your career. Jamie, I'm here to help you see what you didn't know you were doing. Jamie blinked, surprised. I didn't realize how that sounded until afterward. I really didn't think. I just thought it was a mix-up. A mix-up, Alicia said, stepping forward now. Except we had printed boarding passes. We showed them, twice. Darius turned to his son. Tell them what that moment felt like. Elijah looked at the crew, not with anger, but something sharper disappointment. It felt like we were unwanted. Like even though we followed every rule, paid every cent, walked in quietly, we were still out of place, still suspicious. Ava's voice joined him. I've drawn 100 versions of this moment before it ever happened. I just never thought I'd be living one of my own sketches. Captain Reyes looked down at the table. One of the junior attendants wiped a tear from her cheek. Darius stepped back, letting the silence linger. We all make mistakes, he said. But the difference between a mistake and a pattern is whether we learn from it or justify it. Michelle stood abruptly. So what? We're just supposed to pretend every passenger's the same, ignore instincts, ignore tensions. This is the real world, not a script. Darius looked at her evenly. You're right. This isn't a script. But real-world safety has nothing to do with imagined threats rooted in skin color. You let one passenger's prejudice become policy. Michelle opened her mouth, but no words came. Shayna spoke for the first time. As of today, Solace Air is instituting a new protocol. It's called the Visibility Clause. Every crew member will undergo bias reconditioning, not just training, and every incident flagged by passengers will now require a 2-step verification. One technical, one human. There will be no more concern-based removals without clear justification. Michelle sat down slowly. You're making a scapegoat out of me. No, Darius said. We're making an example. Not of you, but of the system that shaped you, Jamie asked quietly. Do we still have jobs? Darius looked at him. That's not for me to answer today. You'll be assessed based on willingness to learn, not just apology. He turned toward his children. Because the world won't change unless the people inside it are willing to. Ava stepped forward again. I used to think dignity was something you earned. Now I realize it's something you already have, but the world spends its time trying to make you prove it. Jamie nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. I'm sorry. Truly. I didn't see it. I do now. Captain Reyes stood. We should have protected them. All of us. Michelle remained silent, her defenses cracking at the edges. Darius turned to the room one final time. This conversation isn't the end. It's the start. We're not grounding planes. We're grounding culture. Because no child should ever be told directly or indirectly that they boarded the wrong dream. He motioned to Shayna, and they exited together, leaving behind a room not of shame, but of transformation. Out in the terminal, Ava and Elijah followed their father down the hallway. This time, heads weren't bowed. This time, people didn't just look. They saw, and slowly, the world, at least their corner of it, began to shift. The sun was beginning to set over the city skyline when Ava found herself alone in the garden courtyard outside Solace Air headquarters. A cluster of roses, dusty pink, not quite in bloom, stood nearby, catching the last rays of daylight. She traced the rim of a ceramic bench with her fingers, eyes unfocused, thoughts swimming. Behind her, the doors opened with a soft click. Elijah stepped out quietly, holding 2 bottles of water. He handed one to her, then sat beside her without saying a word. They didn't need to speak right away. The quiet between them had always been a kind of unspoken agreement, a place where their feelings could settle before being voiced. Ava finally broke the silence. "Do you think people will actually change? Or are we just rearranging furniture in a burning house?" Elijah took a sip of water, then exhaled. "I think some people saw a fire today, and maybe for the first time, they stopped blaming the smoke." Ava let out a faint smile, but her voice was still heavy. "When she looked at us, Eli, it was like we were never supposed to be there, like we broke some invisible rule." "You mean Michelle? I mean the world," she said softly. "She was just a mirror." Elijah turned toward her, brows furrowed. "Did you see Dad's face in there? The part where he said he wasn't speaking as a CEO, but as a father?" Ava nodded. "I felt it in my chest," she whispered, like someone finally said out loud what we've been carrying quietly our whole lives. Elijah placed his hand on hers, not as comfort, but as anchor. Inside the building, Darius stood in the control center of the communications team. Giant screens filled the walls, displaying headlines, tweets, and clips from the press conference now airing on national news. CEO of Solace Air calls out systemic bias. In mid-air incident, black teens removed from first class, father steps in, stops flight. Darius Brooks. "We're not grounding planes, we're grounding culture." His jaw tightened as he read the commentary. The spectrum ranged from support to denial, from outrage to gaslighting. Shayna approached, holding a tablet. "Damage control is stabilizing. You've got news anchors defending the kids on prime time, and you've got others trying to spin it as a misunderstanding." "Of course," Darius muttered. "They always want to water it down until it's palatable." Shayna hesitated. "Do you want to respond to the journalist request from Good Morning America?" "Not yet," he said. "I want my kids to breathe first." She nodded, sensing the storm beneath his calm. "Also," she added, "there's been an outpouring of messages from parents, especially black parents. They're saying thank you, saying they've waited years for someone to say this aloud." Darius's shoulders sank with the weight of both relief and sorrow. "I didn't want to become a symbol," he said, "but maybe it's not about me anymore." That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She lay on her side, sketchbook on the nightstand, phone buzzing quietly every few minutes with alerts. She ignored them all. Eventually, she got up and moved to the living room. In the soft glow of the window light, she flipped open her book. Her pencil hovered, hesitant. Then she began to draw. She sketched the airplane cabin, 2 seats side by side, then shadows, gray hands pointing, blurry mouths open in judgment, and in the middle, 2 teenagers, drawn in bold, soft graphite lines. Not scared, just steady. She flipped the page. This time, she drew a flight attendant standing before a mirror. In the reflection, her uniform was replaced by an old-school hallway, where a teacher stood over a black child holding a gifted test he wasn't expected to pass. Ava paused, staring at the image. What people carried inside them didn't begin at the gate, in his own room. Elijah scrolled through comments on a viral video. He usually hated social media discourse, but this time, he read them. Really read them. "I'm 16. Same thing happened to me last summer. No one believed me. My son cried today because someone finally stood up for kids like him. Watching that man speak, wish my dad had done the same for me." Elijah's eyes burned, not with sadness, but with something harder to describe. A mixture of longing, power, and the ache of overdue recognition. The next morning, The Brooks family sat at their kitchen table. No cameras, no staff. Just 3 bowls of oatmeal and a silence that held more weight than words. Darius looked at his children. "You don't have to keep being strong," he said. Ava stirred her spoon slowly. "We're not being strong. We're being real." Darius smiled, then leaned forward. "I want to create something," he said. "Something that outlives this moment. Not for PR, for people. What do you think about launching a scholarship? Not just for aviation, for kids who are constantly told, in 1,000 small ways, that they don't belong." Elijah perked up, and it could be named after, not us, but something bigger, like the Belong Initiative Ava offered. They all paused. It felt right. Later that day, Darius stood again before the Solace Air staff in a virtual town hall. Thousands of employees tuned in from across the globe. Some of you are angry, some confused, some afraid this change will make your job harder. He let that settle. But real safety doesn't start with compliance. It starts with conscience. His words landed gently, but firmly. This isn't about guilt. It's about awareness. It's about looking at the way systems have been built not to protect all, but to preserve comfort for some. That changes now. Back at school, Ava and Elijah returned to curious stares, whispers, and awkward apologies. "You're those twins from the plane." "Right. Did your dad really stop a whole flight? You guys are, like, heroes or something." They didn't know how to answer, because they weren't trying to be heroes. They just wanted to be treated fairly, to sit in the seats they paid for, to breathe without suspicion. During lunch, Ava looked out over the quad and noticed a younger girl being teased by 2 boys. Quiet, shy, mixed race, holding a notebook close to her chest. Ava stood up. She walked over slowly, calmly. The boys dispersed. Ava sat beside the girl and smiled. "Nice notebook," she said. "What do you draw?" The girl looked up, wide-eyed. "Mostly birds," she whispered, "because they get to go anywhere." Ava nodded. "So do you," she said. That night, she added a new sketch to her book. A young girl with wings, drawing birds that looked like herself, flying higher than anyone expected. 3 weeks had passed since the incident on Flight 327. The headlines had faded, replaced by newer chaos. The media cycle moved on, but for the Brooks family, the echoes of that day lived on quieter now, but no less present. At Solace Air headquarters, the building had started to breathe differently. The hush of guarded glances had lifted. Something had cracked open. A truth no longer whispered in elevators was now being painted on training room walls. Respect is not a reward. It's a right. Diversity isn't a box to check. It's the air we share. If they don't feel safe, you haven't done your job. Darius stood in a glass-walled conference room with Shayna, reviewing the final framework for the Solace Belonging Initiative. It wasn't just a memo. It was infrastructure, policy, mentorship programs, real consequences for bias, a whistleblower system that bypassed middle management, and most radical of all, an internal audit team composed of passengers from diverse backgrounds. He looked over the outline and exhaled. "It's good," he said softly. Shayna nodded. "It's necessary." He leaned against the table. "Funny, isn't it? It took a humiliation to make the plane land, and a reckoning to make the company rise." Shayna didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "Sometimes the wound is the doorway." Darius gave a slow nod. He knew she understood more than she let on. Meanwhile, across town, Ava and Elijah were walking home from school. They passed a mural in progress along the underpass wall. Bold colors swept upward into a sky of fists, feathers, and clouds. an artist balanced on scaffolding, painting a black boy with wings stretched wide, looking back over his shoulder not with fear, but fire. Ava stopped and stared. She pulled out her phone, snapped a photo, then tucked it away. There was something sacred about the expression in that boy's eyes, something that reminded her of Elijah, and maybe, if she was honest, of herself. Elijah broke the silence. I keep thinking about how many times things like that probably happened before. To other kids, to people without last names that mattered. Ava looked down. Yeah, but now, he said, we left a trail. More like a flare. She replied, bright, loud, maybe a little messy. But it got seen. He smirked. Think Dad knows how much we've changed? She considered that. I think he's changing with us. Back at the Brooks residence, Darius sat alone in his study, flipping through a notebook Elijah had left open on the kitchen table. It was filled with observations, people watching notes, quotes from books, lyrics scribbled in the margins. One note stood out. Sometimes silence isn't safety, it's surrender. Darius closed the notebook and stared out the window. His own silence, before all this, hadn't been malice. It had been the quiet of exhaustion, the soft fatigue of a man who'd fought his whole way up, only to realize that the air was just as thin at the top. But his children, they hadn't chosen quiet. They had chosen clarity. And because of that, people were listening. He picked up the phone and called a name he hadn't spoken to in months. Richard, he said when the call connected. A pause. I know we disagreed. I know I walked out. But I need you on the board again. The company's not just flying planes anymore. It's flying a new flag. Richard chuckled on the other end. Took you long enough, brother. That weekend, Solace Air held its first community roundtable, a town hall open to the public, with live stream access and an uncensored Q&A. Ava and Elijah watched from the audience as their father stepped on stage, not in a suit, but a navy pullover and slacks. My name is Darius Brooks, he began, and today, I'm not here as your CEO. I'm here as a listener. Hands raised. Questions flew. Will your crew undergo bias training from actual professionals? Not just HR yes. What happens to staff who commit repeat microaggressions? They'll be reassigned or removed, depending on severity. Are you willing to put teens on your passenger feedback board? I already have 2 in mind. Laughter rippled through the room. Ava and Elijah exchanged a glance. Afterward, they were approached by a young man in a red hoodie, late teens, quiet eyes. You don't know me, he said, voice low. But, thank you. He didn't stay long enough for questions. He just turned and disappeared into the crowd. Later that night, Ava stood in front of her bedroom mirror holding a dress. She was getting ready for the Solace Gala, an annual event that had always seemed stiff and corporate. This year, it was different. This year, youth leaders, community organizers, and previously silenced voices would share the same stage as executives. She slipped on her dress, a soft silver wrap with embroidery down the sides. Nothing extravagant, but it made her feel grounded. Elijah waited by the stairs in a tailored suit. He looked nervous. You okay? Ava asked. He shrugged. Not sure what to say when people start asking about the incident. You don't owe anyone an explanation, she said. But if you do speak, just be real. He nodded. Always. At the gala. The room buzzed with anticipation. Lights low. Strings playing softly. Voices murmuring. For the first time, the guest list wasn't defined by status. It was shaped by story. The stage was set for Ava and Elijah's speech short. 5 minutes, unscripted, just their truth. Elijah stepped up first. My name is Elijah Brooks, and 3 weeks ago, I was told I didn't belong in a seat I paid for. I was told, without words, that someone like me must have made a mistake. He paused. But I didn't. And my sister didn't. And maybe you didn't either. Ava joined him. My name is Ava Brooks. I draw things to understand them. But that day on the plane, I couldn't draw what I felt. I could only live through it. She inhaled slowly. What we're building now, this isn't about revenge. It's about revision, re-seeing the world, rebuilding who gets to be seen. Applause filled the room, not thunderous, but lasting, and that mattered more. That night, as the gala ended and goodbyes circled, a journalist approached Darius with a question. Mr. Brooks, do you believe this airline can become the model for change in a broken industry? Darius looked across the room to Ava and Elijah, laughing with other teens, to Shayna shaking hands with a former flight attendant who had spoken about her own discrimination, to the quiet way hope had slipped into the spaces where fear used to be. He smiled. I believe we already have. It wasn't over. Not really. The gala had gone beautifully. The town halls were making waves, and the Solace Belonging initiative was already being adopted by other airlines. Still, beneath the surface, something unsettled remained. Ava felt it first. It was a strange tension in the hallways at school. At first, it was just long stares, then whispers. Then a few students, mostly the ones who never spoke to her before, started asking questions that didn't quite land right. So? Are you famous now? Did you, sue the airline? Is your dad going to buy the school or something? Ava tried to brush it off, but it dug under her skin. These weren't questions. They were warnings, cloaked in curiosity. And one afternoon, as she opened her locker, she found it, a folded piece of paper. She looked around. No one. She opened it. 3 words, in red ink. Stay and coach. It wasn't signed. She folded the note carefully and slipped it into her sketchbook. That evening, at home, she sat on the porch swing, legs tucked under her. Elijah stepped out with 2 mugs of peppermint tea and handed her one. You good? He asked. She nodded, hesitating, then shook her head. No. She passed him the note. He read it, blinked, then clenched his jaw. I'll tell Dad. He said, No, don't. She shook her head quickly. I don't want him going full CEO warrior again. He sighed. You shouldn't have to deal with this. I know. But we both know what happens when we become the story. Again, they sipped their tea in silence. People don't want change, she said after a while. They want calm, even if it means silence. Then we'll speak anyway, Elijah said, even when our voices shake. Especially then. The next day, at Solace headquarters, Darius received an email from the internal audit team. It was short but deeply concerning. Subject escalated incident, former lead attendant, Miller details. Multiple customer reports of unprofessional outreach, including racially charged DMs sent to Ava Brooks via pseudonymous accounts. Digital forensics confirmed trace back to Miller's IP. Darius sat very still. He hadn't heard Susan Miller's name in weeks. After her termination, she'd seemingly vanished. But this was retaliation cloaked in cowardice. He buzzed Shayna. Get me legal. And HR. We're filing a protective order. Immediately. That evening, Darius sat his children down. I should have told you sooner, he said, looking between them. Susan Miller's been tracked trying to reach out, inappropriately, including to you. Ava. Ava's eyes widened, then darkened. She wrote that note. She tried much more. Darius said, "We're handling it, but I need you to know it's not your fault." Elijah's fists clenched. People don't get it. They think we're trying to take something from them. We're just trying to be safe, seen, respected. Darius leaned forward. "You know what that tells me," he said softly. "It tells me you're changing things. When the dust kicks up, it's because the foundation is shifting. But is it worth it?" Ava asked. Darius didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I used to ask myself that too. Every time I got passed over. Every time I was the only black man in a boardroom of 12. Every time I stayed quiet to keep a seat at a table that didn't want to feed me." He looked her in the eye. "Yes, it's worth it. Even when it hurts. Especially then." The following week, Ava stood before her art class with a rolled canvas in hand. She hadn't planned to share it, but something inside her needed to. "I painted this after everything happened," she began. "It's not pretty, not polished. It's raw." She unrolled the canvas. Gas filled the room. It was a plane in stormlight, half of it lit in gold. The other half cracked open in shadow. Inside were passengers made of mirrors, each reflecting a different face, some clear, some fogged, one shattered. In the back of the plane sat a small child, faceless, arms wrapped around knees. Ava's voice trembled. "Sometimes, when people ask me what it felt like, this is what I show them." No one spoke for a while. Then a classmate raised her hand. "Can we hang it in the hallway?" Ava blinked. "Really, it belongs there." Within a day, the painting had been mounted in the main corridor under a placard, seat 41A, a study in reflection. That weekend, Solace Air hosted a national broadcast roundtable with youth leaders. Ava and Elijah were invited to participate alongside students from across the country. One participant, a young Muslim girl from Chicago named Layla, asked Ava directly, "What gave you the strength to speak out when so many stay quiet?" Ava paused, then smiled. "Fear doesn't mean silence. It means there's something worth protecting." Layla nodded, moved. Elijah added, "We didn't do it alone. Every person who stepped up after made us feel like we weren't crazy. That's the power of being believed." The event was streamed live, and the comments section flooded with stories. Others who had been asked to move, denied their seat, judged on sight, told they were too loud, too different, too not the norm. A wave had begun. The very next morning, Darius walked into the executive boardroom to find a box waiting for him. Inside was a handwritten note and a small carved airplane. The note read, "To Mr. Brooks and family. I was the pilot that day. I did nothing. I regret that. I see you now. I see all of us now. Thank you for grounding more than just a plane. No name, just initials C. W." He placed the airplane on his desk. Later that evening, Ava and Elijah walked down the runway of a local youth expo, invited as keynote guests not because they were the twins from the viral flight, but because they were now the co-founders of a new national art and advocacy initiative, High Altitude Voices. Their first project, an exhibition titled Unclaimed Seat Stories from the Skies. Elijah looked at his sister backstage. Ready, Ava took a breath. "Let's board." As they stepped into the spotlight, applause rose around them, not for who they were on paper, but for who they'd chosen to become, and somewhere in the back row. Darius watched with quiet pride, not as a CEO, not as a man with headlines behind him, but as a father. Finally, just a father. The air buzzed with electricity as the audience applauded. Ava and Elijah stood side by side on the polished stage. lights catching the gold thread sewn into the hem of Ava's blazer. Her curls were tucked neatly beneath a navy beret, while Elijah's charcoal gray suit matched the softness in his eyes. Cameras clicked, but neither of them posed. This wasn't about glamour. It wasn't even about justice anymore. It was about what came next. Ava stepped forward, adjusting the mic. The crowd hushed. When we boarded that plane a year ago, we thought we were just traveling to see our grandmother. Just another trip. Just 2 kids and 2 seats. But we became symbols, not by choice, by circumstance. She paused. Her voice remained soft, but there was steel beneath it. I didn't want to be a symbol. I wanted to be safe, to be treated like a person. But what happened forced me to see the difference between silence and peace. And it taught me something we should have never had to learn at 17, that dignity is not guaranteed. It's defended. The auditorium stood still, the weight of her words reaching every row. Elijah stepped beside her. His voice was calmer, but no less resolute. We're not here because we fought alone. We're here because people stood up, because someone said, "Not on my flight," because stories matter, because art matters, because policy matters, and because no child should ever wonder if their seat will be taken just because of their skin. They stepped back together, holding hands. The applause that followed didn't erupt, it rose, slow and thunderous, like something reverent. Backstage, Darius waited, not as the CEO of Solace Air, not even as a guest of honor, just as their father. He opened his arms and they stepped into them. That night, back at home, the house was quiet. The 3 of them sat in the kitchen under the soft hum of the pendant light. A half-eaten plate of lemon bars rested between them, Ava's favorite. Darius poured tea and asked softly, "So, what now?" Ava looked at Elijah. "College applications. Poetry scholarship for her," Elijah said, grinning. "She's being modest." "And civil engineering for him," Ava added. "He wants to design airports now." Darius laughed, though tears touched the corners of his eyes. "I thought you hated flying." "I did," Alicia said. "But if you want to build something better, you have to start at the foundation." Darius nodded slowly, pride pulsing through his chest. Later that month, the Solace Belonging Initiative was officially expanded under a federal transportation bill co-sponsored by 3 senators, each of whom had met with Ava and Elijah personally. The mandate included anonymous onboard incident reporting via mobile app, quarterly anti-bias training with third-party oversight, mandatory youth and disability inclusion panels for policy reviews, scholarships for underrepresented aviation students. The legislation was dubbed the Brooks Amendment, though the twins insisted it was never about their name. It was about every name that had been erased, every name that had been moved, silenced, profiled, or dismissed. It was a ripple that began on seat 4A and 4B and reached the Capitol steps. But not all wounds healed at the same pace. One morning, a certified letter arrived for Darius. It was addressed in neat handwriting and bore no return address. Inside was a short note, written in black ink. "Dear Mr. Brooks, I watched the broadcast. I watched your children. I was the passenger who didn't speak up that day, the one who sat in silence when Ava cried, when the attendants lied, when Elijah clenched his fists. I want to say I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, but for what I failed to do. I can't take it back, but I won't stay silent again. Thank you for showing me how to speak." A silent seatmate. Darius sat with the note for a long time. Then he folded it, placed it into a small wooden box beside the carved airplane the pilot had once sent. Ava later added a note of her own. Your silence had weight, but so does your change. A few months later, Ava sat in an airport terminal, not as a passenger, but as a featured guest for the inaugural unveiling of Solasair's new youth-designed safety campaign. Her art was everywhere, printed on seatback cards, digital screens, and even luggage tags. Each one featured a simple message: everyone belongs. Every seat counts. As she looked out the window, a family walked by two young girls in matching pink jackets, holding hands. The older one looked up at Ava's poster, then tugged her mom's sleeve. "Mom, that's the girl who changed the airplanes." Her mother paused, then smiled. "That's right." Ava smiled quietly to herself. In another part of the country, Elijah walked across a grassy quad. Architectural plans rolled under his arm. His professor had just announced his proposal for a new community-centered terminal design would be submitted to a national competition. He hadn't told Ava yet. He wanted it to be a surprise. But one detail was already fixed in the model. At the center of the terminal would stand a sculpture, two interlocked seats, one slightly smaller, one slightly worn. A plaque beneath would read, "Reserved for Truth," in memory of every flight not taken, every voice not heard. At home. Darius packed a bag for a rare vacation. Just him, Ava, Elijah, and no headlines, no press. He looked at a recent photo, the three of them laughing in front of a row of sunflowers, and felt a strange ache in his chest. Not pain, gratitude. Later, during the flight, Ava dozed against the window. Elijah had headphones on, and Darius watched the horizon from seat 4A, the same seat his daughter had once been asked to give up. A flight attendant walked by and paused. "Mr. Brooks," she said warmly. "Thank you." He nodded. "For what?" "For staying on the plane." Darius smiled faintly, then looked at his children. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." As the plane began its descent, the seatbelt sign flicked on. The world tilted slightly, sun brushing the edge of clouds. And together, they came in for landing, not just to the ground, but to a new place. A place where stories didn't have to break you to change you. A place where every seat, every voice, every name finally, fully belonged. You've now heard the story of Ava and Elijah Brooks, two teenagers who boarded a plane with nothing but boarding passes and the quiet belief that they belonged. But they were met with doubt, with subtle rejection, with a question that too many people of color are forced to answer daily. Do you really deserve to be here? Their journey didn't end with a confrontation. It began there. Because their father didn't just demand justice. He redefined what accountability looks like in real time. He grounded a plane not out of anger, but out of purpose. And Ava and Elijah. They didn't let trauma silence them. They turned pain into poetry, exclusion into art, and injustice into a movement. This isn't just a story about an airline. It's a mirror held up to every system, every institution, every moment where bias hides behind politeness and rules are twisted to excuse racism. Let it remind us every seat has a story. Every silence has a cost, and every child deserves to fly without fear. If this story moved you even a little, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, human-centered stories that bring truth to light. Because we're just getting started, and the next story might be yours.